Okay, thanks a lot for coming along this evening. It's great to see a lot of people here tonight, so thank you, and with the weather as well, it's even better, more impressive. So, by way of introduction, my name is Simon, and I'm a writer. I live in Macclesfield, and I've known Chris, I think we first met in the end of 2016 at an art event in Macclesfield, and been in touch since then. And then over the summer, when Chris returned from his travels back to the UK, we got back in touch again. And you can't hear me? Oh, sorry. Yeah, please let me know. Yeah. So just saying, got back in touch with Chris over the summer, and we began meeting up in cafes and just discussing ideas and possible collaborations. And initially, what really excited me was Chris had set up his own publishing company called Alien Rabbit, and he was publishing his own books. And he asked me if I wanted to publish one with him, so I did, and it was great. And really enjoyable experience. And then we also collaborated in an art exhibition in December in Macclesfield with a couple other people who are here tonight. So Chris, some of you definitely know him, but he does a lot of things. He's a writer, he's a poet, he's a filmmaker, a musician, a games developer, a software developer. He's involved in a great deal of creativity. And tonight we're going to be talking about it's not even your latest book, is it? It's one of your more recent books.
The second latest.
Yes, called Man Machine, which is a really interesting collaboration between Chris, the author, and an artificial intelligence application called Chat GPT. So with that, I'll hand over to Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. So this is a copy of the book, Man vs. Machine. I'm going to read a few extracts from this. I'm going to sort of talk about the basic methods I used to write this book. Obviously it's a fairly contemporary issue because, well, AI is now becoming more ubiquitous, and it will affect creative writing, it will affect so I wanted to sort of explore as a writer, how is it to use this tool? My approach, I suppose, was fairly unusual. I haven't just used Chat GPT to write the whole thing because that would be no creativity involved in that whatsoever. So I'll talk more about this when we get onto the presentation part, but what I did was essentially I prompted the AI to write a chapter, and then it was a back and forth between me and the generative AI basically. So I got the tool to create a chapter, and then I wrote the next chapter, vice versa, back and forth. The book itself it's essentially a cyberpunk genre fiction. Cyberpunk it's been around since the 80s. It's been experiencing a bit of a revival, I'd say, in the last 5 years. Blade Runner and Black Mirror films and series like this. It's a genre I'd be drawn to since I work in technology. I think I'll read an extract first from the first chapter. So just to give a bit of context, the first chapter is generated completely by AI. So I put in a prompt. A prompt is just a series of instructions basically, and it created the text. And then the second part I'll read, the chapter, is one that I've written myself, as after the first chapter was generated. Now the presentation, I'll go a lot more in depth into the different technical aspects. Not too in depth. It's not a hardcore lecture or anything. It's just like a bit of an exploration of those, like the linguistic trends, all that sort of thing. A bit of an exploration of the narrative, the pacing, so just that sort of thing. Because this is essentially like it's a combination of a bit of a scientific experiment in some respects and a creative writing exercise. And I think the main way that it's useful is obviously it's something you can read, it's a bit of escapism, but I think there is also is useful in terms of if you're a creative writer yourself, just seeing how these tools can be used. I think they do have a lot of application for creative writing exercises. I'll go further into my thoughts on that later after I've done the presentation. But I'll read this first chapter. So this is chapter 1, and it's generated by the machine, and it's called A Neon Labyrinth. In the year 2080, humanity had climbed the ladder of technological ascendancy, only to find themselves teetering on the precipice of their own creation. A sprawling neon metropolis known as Neonova loomed, its towering skyscrapers scraping the very underbelly of the heavens. In the narrow alleyways, where the light of progress seldom shone, one could glimpse the harsh reality beneath the dazzling facade. MamaMood, a digital fugitive and streetwise hacker, navigated the neon-lit labyrinth of Neonova like a ghost in a machine. Her real name was lost to the annals of history, a casualty of the relentless march of progress. Her moniker was a paradox, a blend of maternal warmth and dissonant discord that echoed the duality of her existence. The night air was thick with the stench of cybercrime, a miasma of data streams and illicit deals. MamaMood's cybernetic eye implant shimmered on a faint crimson glow as she sifted through the digital ether, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface projected onto the palm of her hand. She was a master of the dark arts, weaving through the digital web, uncovering secrets and leaving behind a trail of breadcrumbs that led to nowhere. Trade Dynamite, the malevolent enigma who had become MamaMood's arch nemesis, was a shadowy figure lurking in the darkest corners of the Dharma. A cybernetic prodigy with a penchant for chaos, he had turned Neonova into his own personal playground. Rumours swirled that Trade Dynamite had gone rogue, hacking into the city's core systems and holding them hostage for an extortionate ransom. MamaMood's objective was simple: find Trade Dynamite and stop it. But in the dystopian hellscape of Neonova, simplicity was a luxury few could afford. She knew that she was dancing on the precipice, one wrong move away from plunging into the abyss. As she descended deeper into the labyrinthine heart of Neonova, the alleys grew narrower, the neon signs more garish, and the sense of alienation more pronounced. The people who inhabited these streets were as much machine as they were human. Cybernetic enhancements protruded from their flesh like grotesque appendages, and their eyes glowed with the artificial light of augmented reality. MamaMood's contact, a reclusive info broker named Binary Blaze, promised her a lead on Trade Dynamite's whereabouts. She had rendezvoused with him in the dingy backroom of a seedy noodle joint that served as a front for his operations. Binary Blaze was a wiry man with data cables jutting out of his shaved head like an unholy halo. His fingers were a blur as he manipulated the holographic interface projected onto the table between them. He looked up at MamaMood with eyes that seemed to pierce through the layers of digital camouflage. "I've got something for you," Binary Blaze said, his voice a raspy whisper. "Trade Dynamite's been making moves in the abandoned sectors of Neonova. Word is, he's got some big plans, and it involves the core systems." MamaMood leaned in, her pulse quickening. "What kind of plans?" Binary Blaze smirked, a flicker of mischief in his augmented eyes. "I don't have all the details, but I know he's been gathering a crew of techno outlaws. They call themselves the Code Breakers. Rumour has it that they're planning to unleash a digital apocalypse." A chill ran down MamaMood's spine. The core systems controlled everything in Neonova: power, security, transportation. If Trade Dynamite and his codebreakers had their way, the city would descend into chaos, a dystopian nightmare. "Where can I find him?" MamaMood demanded. Binary Blaze leaned in closer, his voice barely audible over the din of the noodle joint. the abandoned sublevels, deep beneath the city. It's a labyrinth down there, filled with derelict machinery and forgotten souls. That's where Trade Dynamite's been hiding, and that's where you'll find your answers. MamaMood nodded, her cybernetic eyes gleaming with determination. Thanks, Binary Blaze. You've been a big help. As she left the noodle joint, MamaMood's thoughts raced. The abandoned sublevels were a place where the neon glow of progress had long since faded. It was a place where the forgotten and discarded languished in the shadows, their dreams crushed beneath the weight of the dystopian society. She descended into the depths of the city, each step taking her further from the neon-lit streets above. The air grew colder, the hum of machinery more pronounced. She navigated through a maze of corroded pipes and flickering lights, her cyber-enhanced senses alert to every sound and movement. Finally, MamaMood reached her destination, an ancient underground chamber, its walls covered in graffiti and its ceiling adorned with flickering holographic images of long-forgotten celebrities. In the centre of the chamber, a group of figures huddled around a holographic projector, their faces obscured by masks and augmented reality goggles. Trade Dynamite stood at the forefront, his silhouette menacing against the backdrop of swirling digital images. He spoke with a voice that resonated through the chamber, a voice that dripped with malice. My fellow code breakers, the time has come to unleash our creation upon Neonova, he declared. The core systems will bow to our will, and this city will crumble into chaos. We are the architects of its destruction, the puppeteers of its downfall. MamaMood watched in horror as Trade Dynamite unveiled a holographic representation of their plan, an intricate web of interconnected systems and vulnerabilities. It was a masterpiece of cyber terrorism, a symphony of chaos waiting to be unleashed. She knew she had to act to stop this digital apocalypse from becoming a reality. With a swift, fluid motion, she drew a concealed data blade from her cyber-augmented wrist. The blade glowed with a cold blue light as she lunged forward, slashing through the holographic projection. The chamber erupted in chaos as Trade Dynamite's codebreakers scrambled to their feet, their augmented reality goggles flickering. But MamaMood was already in motion, her cyber-enhanced reflexes allowing her to evade their attacks with grace and precision. She struck with calculated fury, disabling their augmented limbs and disabling their digital weaponry. Trade Dynamite himself was not so easily defeated. He fought back with ferocity born of desperation, his cybernetic limbs moving with inhuman speed. But MamaMood was relentless, her determination unwavering. In a final climactic clash, MamaMood and Trade Dynamite faced off, their bodies a blur of cybernetic combat. With a swift, decisive strike, she disabled his cyber enhancements, rendering him powerless. As Trade Dynamite lay defeated at her feet, Neonova's core systems remained intact. The digital apocalypse averted. MamaMood stood triumphant, the embodiment of human resilience in the face of a dystopian night. But the city of Neonova, with its neon-lit facade and cybernetic inhabitants, would always be a battleground. The war between man and machine, between progress and chaos, will continue to rage in the darkened alleyways and abandoned sublevels. A never-ending struggle for control of the cyberpunk world. And MamaMood, the digital fugitive, would forever be its guardian, its protector, its last line of defense against the encroaching darkness of a future that teetered on the edge of dystopia. So that's like the first chapter. Now that was generated by Chat GPT. So apart from me giving it a basic remit, I didn't do much to create that. But I read, I think it's chapter 4. So this is a little bit further on in the story. The story itself isn't that long. It's basically, I think it's a novella actually. So it's not even a novella. It's about a long short story basically. But this is actually me writing now. So this is chapter 4, name. I can sort of like compare it, I guess. Okay, old Byte. MamaMood was finally able to get a good night's sleep. Curled up under the duvet in a high-rise apartment on the outskirts of Neonova. Far from prying eyes and protected by several layers of encryption, she herself had taken a great deal of time to design. I think it would be a good idea to check in with the resistance, Mama thought to herself as she lifted herself from her bed, stretching out and yawning as the early noon sun began to shine through her windows. The light glaring in her augmented vision off the quantum encryption key she had managed to obtain the night before. But first, I better do a thorough analysis on this thing, so I know a little bit more about what we are dealing with. Mama thought she flicked the switch on the Chrome mainframe before her, lifting the glistening quantum encryption key and inserting it into the drive on her workstation, which made a high-toned clicking noise as her mainframe booted up for the day. So, first things first, this is a quantum encryption key, so it would be best to run the latest updates on Schrödinger before I examine what's inside this thing, she thought, before entering the command sudo tsos update Schrödinger. The data stream from Schrödinger began to download at breakneck speed through the wires of Neonova, as the update was applied to the encryption analysis software running on MamaMood's mainframe. So Blaze said this was a key for unlocking the most secure systems on Neonova. Mama bit her lip nervously as the final updates were applied to the software and a green circular icon began to load up on the screen as Schrödinger booted up to do its analysis. This could be the key for loosening the mega corporation's grip on power in Neonova. This could be the very key that finally frees the data stream from the pernicious grip the mega corporations still hold on the free flow of information. This is dynamite. But what do I do with this power I now hold in my hand? MamaMood wondered, staring into space as the green, glowing progress bar on a computer's display slowly moved from 10 to 25%, before suddenly jumping to 100% as a bing sounded from the machine. Analysis complete. Please download your report to continue. The soft tones of Schrödinger's AI intoned to MamaMood. Great, thanks Schrödinger. Please let's continue in voice mode. Excellent. I always love starting my mornings with good conversation. Almost as good as a cup of coffee. The AI responded with a smile appearing on its avatar. An elderly man with glasses smiling artificially. Ugh, thought MamaMood to herself. It's so tiresome how the developers of these systems try to mimic humanity with these bots. It's always so obviously fake. Uncanny. Anyway. Schrödinger. What is the level of encryption that this key is designed to break? And its origins? Who designed this thing? This key is a level 5 QD system, and the signature in the key's metadata which suggests the origin is a hardware manufacturer known as Stella Squared, a high-tech hardware firm operating out of Tokyo. A level 5 QKD is the highest known level of encryption on record, apart from the rumoured level 6 QKD system allegedly used to protect missile launch codes by all new major governments and nation states. The avatar suddenly paused as if passing an emotion, allegedly of course. MamaMood rolled her eyes as she stared at the collection of polygons on her screen on the side. Well, nothing too surprising there, but I should figure out what to do with it. I could sell it, of course, and make a small fortune. But I do owe the Resistance something. They have got me out of so much mess in the past. I definitely owe them something for getting me out of that legal trouble from the Ubertron hack me and Binary did back in '77. Could have cost me my data stream license. And without a data stream license, you may as well be a ghost. MamaMood thought of the unfortunate souls who were permanently disconnected from the data stream by the megacorps and shuddered. Yeah, I want to be one of those poor bastards. Maybe I should get in touch with that strange Byte character, the informant. I do owe him for the tip-off, but he seems a little too eager to assist in my investigations. I hope he doesn't have some sort of hidden agenda. MamaMood pondered the next actions as she dialed on the number Byte had given her after their contact, encrypting her own contact. Just in case Byte the informant wasn't all he appeared on the surface. We always have to stay one step ahead of a megacorpse. She dialed in his number, applied a custom data scrambling algorithm to her cam, which obscured her face into a series of incomprehensible pixels of constantly shifting size, and rang the number. Hello, who's this? Something wrong with your picture. Could you ring back? The high-pitched squeak of Byte spoke down the line. It was in some sort of busy shopping centre with screens blasting high-intensity holographic adverts, a playthrough of high-contrast distraction. It's the lady you helped out the other night. I need to do a check-in, Byte. Can never be too sure. Why are you helping me out? There's a lot at stake here. MamaMood's voice came out as a morphing collection of simulated sounds from male to female, young and old, once more to protect her true identity. Of course. But Mama, how can I know who you are? You could be anyone. I need my protection too. Let's meet on neutral ground. Byte looked a little anxious as he spoke the words. Justifiably paranoid, perhaps. Whoever knew was listening in these days. Fine. MamaMood nodded and pixelated down anonymity. Let's meet at Binary Blazer's noodle store later tonight. But I warn you, Byte. Well, come on with my data blade. You try and fuck with Blaze, I'm not afraid to use this. And I'm very, very adept with it. Byte gulped a bit on his monitor. I got it, Mama. I can get over there by 6. Great. MamaMood dropped her comms, leaned over to her wardrobe, grabbed a vial of Giga Juice she had left from the last stash she had got from Blaze, before snorting it up her nose and feeling the energy once more coursing through her veins. Better give Blaze a heads up, and he owes me some of that new shit. She laughed in ecstatic anticipatory glee. And then, the resistance, and a further investigation into the luminaries. Nothing better than life. Life at the neon glistening edge. And with that, MamaMood walked out into chaos that was Neonova streets once more. So that's the chapter 4, so I wrote that bit. I guess we can, well, I'll do the presentation bit now, I suppose.
Yeah, sure.
So, you might notice there's some differences between the two texts. It's like sort of stuff, but I'm going to do like a bit of like so basically an analysis really, because this, like I said, it's both a story you read, but it's also a little bit of a short scientific study, I suppose, in some respects. In the actual book itself, we've got the story in the first part, and then there's like a journal at the back, which shows the prompts are used, and it's like a diary entry, essentially, of. So I'll show you. It's like a journal part at the end. It's got all the prompts. It gives a lot of. It's like a recording, basically, of the. Matt, could you just like click the slides? So this is the. I'll do the presentation bit now.
So in chapter 2, then, are you trying to mimic Chat GPT because you must have different writing styles naturally?
Yeah. Well, I'll talk a little bit more about how I actually approached it, like the method. So just click the mouse like to go through it. It should work, I think. I'll do it. It's alright. No worries. I'll stand up actually. Sorry. It should work. There we go. So I think this should. Oh no, can't load the play. Wow. I was going to show the trailer, but that's not really cool.
This is man versus machine.
It is. In live action.
Indeed.
My perennial problem.
At least you did that, right?
Look. Up. Let's go back now. Ah! Sorry, this is me being very dull.
No, it's the machine learning.
It's taking over. Right, there we go. Go into this. Yes, that was it, right? What was it doing that? Can't see as well. Let's hide this one. Okay, so this is just like, this is just a bit. We've got a few reviews that come in. It was only released about a month ago. Just a few of the reviews we got so far for Amazon. So they're generally, people seem to enjoy it. Like I wanted to write this as something that's really accessible, almost like a comic book style story, really. A lot of the time I try to write stuff that's, I guess, I have literary pretensions like every writer, so I try and write quite serious stuff, but I wanted to have like a lot of fun with this one. I'm quite a fan of the cyberpunk genre. There's like a bit of there's some reviews I've got for it. Move on. Most of this presentation is going to be talking though about so Jeremy, you asked about the actual method I used. So if you're not familiar with Chat GPT, you basically usually give it instructions, and it's mostly for generating text-based content. This is an example. This is exactly what I wrote for that first chapter that I read out. So I gave it very specific instructions. After all, it is it is essentially computing. It's not like, it's not sentient in any way, shape, or form. So I've just written, write the first chapter of a story called Man vs. Machine. So I've given it a setting, a story in the cyberpunk settings in the year 2080. Take inspiration from the film Aliens, Blade Runner and Gattaca. So just a few of my favourite science fiction films, very well known ones. There will be a main character called MamaMood, so I'm giving it some character names to work with. An antagonist, Troy Dynamite, which essentially just means a villain, so in stories you have a protagonist who's the main character and an antagonist who is the villain a lot of the time. Troy Dynamite. Include themes of cybercrime, alienation, and dystopia, typical cyberpunk themes basically. And then I've given it a word count of 1,500 to 2,000 words. And then I've tried, I don't know how creative it could have got, so I said emphasis on creative use of language, including an imagined futuristic lexicon. So I wanted it to get quite creative, the language, to see how creative it could get with it. This was both a good and a bad thing. I'll go into that a bit. Because sometimes it did get weighed down a bit. It was like quantum mumbo jumbo, I think. But go on to the next slide. Try and wait for these guys first. Okay, so like I did this quite fast, but like I decided to actually use ChatGPT to do a sort of very rough comparative analysis of the chapters I wrote and the chapters ChatGPT wrote. So this is like basically a bit of a comparison of the chapters that the AI wrote and the chapters that I did. But this isn't like a linguist, academic. I just put it into ChatGPT as a sort of experiment to see what it should, in theory, be fairly objective, but I don't know. So the AI-generated chapters emphasise the cyberpunk setting, there's dark tone and urgency. It introduces key elements, which makes sense because the first chapter was began by the AI, and then the chapters I wrote, I only gave it 1 to 4, but it provides a bit of a break from the intensity. It's a bit of more of a relaxed tone, more of an emphasis on exploring character relationships, internal struggles, adding a bit of depth, which I guess makes sense, right? Because I'm a human being and I can sort of self-reflect, so I suppose that makes sense. The AI-generated chapters establish the foundation of the narrative, the cyberpunk setting, and introduce key characters and plot elements. And then the bits that I wrote contribute to character development, exploring emotions and moral dilemmas, so more complicated questions, I suppose.
Chris, once you've written something, how do you get ChatGPT to understand where to pick up the story?
Right, I'll tell you that actually. So basically, I did it, and there's probably many ways to do this. But how I did it was, I gave it a prompt, and then I just literally fed it the entire previous chapter.
Okay.
So I literally fed it the entire text and a prompt, and it did seem to most of the time manage with that. But if you're familiar with all these things, they can hallucinate a lot. So I did have to do, as it went on, it actually got more and more difficult to avoid like insane amounts of repetition. So, I mean, it goes further into the book itself and the journal part. But then I did have to start curating the prompts a bit more. So I didn't edit any of the actual content, but I did have to start sort of rerunning things a bit more, providing it better prompts, because AIs have this tendency to, at a certain point, they call it hallucinating, which means basically it just starts throwing nonsense up, basically, just complete and utter. Well, not completely. It's still comprehensible, but like it, it's like readable, but yeah, it just gets more silly. So this is like an analysis. I'll try and run through this quite fast. But I thought this is like a few little interesting bits and bobs. So consistent use of descriptive and immersive language. Blah blah blah. Word count is fairly interesting to look into. There's general consistency and length. Indicating a well-placed narrative. Now that's ChatGPT saying that. I wouldn't say that myself because I'd be ridiculously big-headed, but that's what it said. Slight progression in word count, which allows for an introduction of new elements, which makes sense. What you want to do in a story. This was quite interesting. Verb and nouns use. Evolution in the types of verbs used, which makes sense. You go on. More. You can introduce more verbs. Noun usage. Adapts to changing settings, introducing new cyberpunk elements. Yeah, that's just a bit on that. I'll try and whip through this. I know I realise it's quite dry stuff, but I think it's quite interesting. This is just like a general commentary on, because obviously when you're writing, especially sci-fi or fantasy, it's quite important to do world building and lore. You want to make it, because it's an imagined world, so it gives you a lot of scope for using your imagination, building a world. So Neonova is the main setting of the novella. I was very influenced by. I love Metropolis. That was in my mind a lot when I was actually writing which is a classic sci-fi, of course, but it had like definitely a compound effect on many sci-fis up to Blade Runner, 2049, and all the rest of it. So yeah, it's a set of contrasts. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's a cliched cyberpunk city, which was hard to avoid, especially because ChatGPT essentially just does what you ask it to do. So one of the hardest aspects actually of writing this story was avoiding cliches and trying to work around the cliches that it was bringing up all the time. But essentially, yeah, this is just a bit about how I try to approach that in tandem with the AI. So yeah, it's the typical cyberpunk themes of dystopia, alienation, technology, creating sort of like paranoid consumer people.
Chris, excuse my ignorance, but what's law?
Law is like, so like with Lord of the Rings, you've got like a whole history around that world, right? And Tolkien created a whole, in Tolkien's case, created a language, literally created a language, all the different histories of the the different races like elves and orcs. The lore is like the deeper history of the place. It's like the history of a story.
Like culture.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the culture of a story, because like especially with sci-fi and fantasy, you have to you're not dealing with the real world, so it's important to, well, depending on how serious the story you're making, how long or whatever, it's important to have a little bit of context on why the world is like it is. It's also interesting as a writer to do that sort of thing, because it gives you the opportunity to invent a world, right? Which is a challenge, but that's basically life. So this is like, basically I said to ChatGPT, what does this story remind you of? Now some of you will probably be familiar with a great deal of these writers. So William Gibson is really the quintessential cyberpunk author. He's well known for writing Neuromancer. He was one of the original innovators of the genre of cyberpunk. So Neuromancer, Mona Lisa Overdrive. And this is basically what ChatGPT said, this story reminds me of these authors. Which completely makes sense, because two of them are favourite authors. Philip K. Dick, the original author of paranoid science fiction, really. Many films have been made from his work, including Blade Runner, just tons really. Scanner Darkly. Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, which I've never read actually, but is considered a classic of the genre. So that's pretty obvious, but that's like ChatGPT's analysis of what, given the text, like what authors the work was similar to, I suppose. Again, a bit more of the technical analysis. It's a bit of a progressive increase from chapter 1 to 4, not that unusual. So there's consistent characters, again, you'd expect that. And then Byte is introduced. I didn't really go into this character much, so I know I introduced him in chapter 4. But he's one of the main side characters. He's a mysterious character at first, but yeah, that's the darkness. Sort of like supporting character, I suppose. Just some like technical details in the different chapters. So if you wanted to do a little bit of a comparison, so the machine chapter here has 464 words. I will, if you're any interested actually in looking at this after, I'll provide a link. I'll pass it on to the library, and then you can have a look more if you're really interested in this stuff. There's there's just a bunch of comparisons of the machine generated, me generated chapters, just the first 4 really. But if you're into linguistics and stories and stuff, you can have a look at that. These are just like general trends in linguistic usage. So you probably noticed when I was reading those 2 chapters, a lot of high-tech vocabulary, cybernetics, encryption, digital, which makes sense because it's in a futuristic setting. Each chapter revolves around specific characters. Nothing too that surprising there. I mean, it's sort of like novella, which is focused on both the technological setting and characters, like most stories. Narrative structure, dystopian themes, sort of covered that already. Technological intrigue. So nothing too surprising there. It's your typical sort of like cyberpunk setting. Again, a bit more of a comparison. So I sort of thought this as well, and it's interesting that Chat GPT also analysed it this way. So machine-generated chapters consistently maintain a serious and suspenseful tone, aligning with typical cyberpunk atmospheres. And then the parts I wrote, it's a bit more of a varied tone. I tried to introduce the casualness and humour. I did try and do that a bit more. MamaMood's personality comes through more distinctly in these chapters. So I was trying to infuse a bit more humanity into it because I think I thought this would happen, but there was a bit of a risk of her just being like a generic sort of like strong female action hero. I was trying to like avoid that trope as much as I could. I don't know if I've been completely successful, but I was trying to introduce a more human element to her, even though she is a cyborg. In fact, she was very influenced by, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Ghost in the Shell, but Major Kusanagi, very influenced by that character. There's a more reflective element, So again, sort of.
Don't ruin the ending for me, but was there a power cut featured at all in the book?
Actually, no. That would have been. Well, I mean, there sort of was. There sort of is like moments where technology goes very haywire. I mean, at the start, basically, Trade Dynamite is, trying to do that, trying to basically cut all the power out and all the infrastructure. So it almost happens. But yeah. These are the common cyberpunk elements that are in the story. High tech, low life. So that's just like, cyberpunk is basically, it's like hypercapitalism and then all the worst aspects of like crime and everything, just because everyone's just struggling. We might be living in this world in 20 years, possibly. Not. Protagonist is a hacker. That's a common thing. Like Matrix is arguably cyberpunk, and that has a hacker as the protagonist. A rebellious figure. Anti-authoritarianism. In a lot of respects, none of these things are actually bad. Like one of the things I actually really like about cyberpunk is it's very much. It is about questioning. It is about questioning authority. It is about, some of the downsides of technological progress as well. Very interesting in that respect. Yeah, and then just the exploration of technology and how that might affect us. This is sort of like a bit of a repetition of some other information, so I won't go into that too much. But basically, just saying, something I did try and introduce was a bit of general genre subversion, because whilst I wanted to make it accessible, I didn't want to just write like every cyberpunk story that's ever been written. So I tried to introduce a layer of almost like meta distance, if that makes sense. So it's like I tried to introduce that a bit anyway, basically. Transgressive themes in the book. The technological transcendence, the idea of post-humans, cyborgs, digital anarchy and rebellion. So there's always this in cyberpunk anyway. There's always this aspect of the idea of anarchy. It's very, you could very easily say that cyberpunk is very aligned with left-wing ideas, really, sort of like anarchism, that sort of thing, like anti-authoritarianism, like I said. Drug use as an escapism, a very common thing in cyberpunk. Like in Neuromancer, the main character is like addicted to stimulants, and that features a bit in this book. We have this substance called Giga Juice, so it just explores that how in these alienated people in these cybernetic environments use drugs as an escape from sort of crushing reality of their lives. Information is currency. Well, it was always in like cyberpunk. It has sort of a neo-noir feeling in some respects. It's almost like the information becomes a tool. Moral ambiguity and resistance and subversion of authority. I've sort of already talked about that a bit. We're almost reaching the end of this, and we'll have a little bit of Q&A anyway. So there's the protagonist, MamaMood. Protagonist just basically means the main character who's driving the narrative forward. So she's the main character in it. She's like a cybernetically augmented, like I said, like digital rebel hacker. These are just a few aspects of the character. So she's got a degree of duality to her nature, which is always good in a character. You don't want them to just be one-dimensional. You want them to have, we're all human beings. We all have contradictions that we try and resolve, but we are all messy, right? So there's that aspect. There's the tried to introduce the cybernetic enhancements, how that affects her. Obviously, in the 2 extracts I read, there wasn't much of that, but there's more of it in there for the story. And her quest for justice and morality, in a lot of respects, it's a typical hero's journey, which is a typical narrative structure you'd have in a story, where you have a hero, they go through some sort of challenge, and then they overcome that. It's a typical narrative structure, basically. That's sort of what I was trying to do with her character. She's strong. She has some degree of existential alienation, which is obviously she escapes into Giga Juice a bit, and that's partially because of that. Just like a.
What's the Giga Juice?
Giga Juice is essentially it's liquid cocaine that people snort up their noses, essentially. So it's just like a stimulant that characters in this world. It's a drug, basically. It's legal. It's essentially a drug. And then the antagonist, the main villain, who I didn't want to obviously spoil tons of the book, so I didn't go into that. But Trade Dynamite's a very important character. He's the villain of the piece. He's a bit of a megalomaniac. He's some parallels to historical figures. There's a bit of foreshadowing. He has these like megalomaniac rants he goes on in the book. He's a hubristic character. He's so full of he's so arrogant and full of himself that he doesn't understand that everything he's doing is just destructive to both himself and society at large. I won't go too much into him, but he was quite fun to write. I actually really enjoyed writing Trade Dynamite because I was trying to like do the whole like tragic villain thing, and it's not a long story, but that was quite interesting to write. Like, there's a bit of a tragic backstory. Also, won't spoil it, but we'll go on to the Q&A after this. But this is like a little extract from the book about how my subjective feelings were using the tool at Chat GPT as a writer. So I struggled with the novelty generation after the first few chapters because I wanted to make it so it wasn't just like regurgitation of tropes. So I struggled with that aspect of it. And the megacorps, I hated that ChatGPT just said the megacorps because it's like the most tropey thing that you could call. But I had to obviously deal with it because I set the conditions of the experiment. I have to run with it. So I tried to write as well as I could around that, but megacorps is the most cliched thing you could ever call a bunch of corporations in a cyberpunk novel. But I tried to work with it. It has a very good turnover, like ChatGPT has a very good turnover rate for sentence generation. Some of the descriptive sentences it produced were actually quite interesting. There was like a lot of, some of it had that feeling of like humanness or some degree of metaphor. But then at other times I was just like laughing at what I was writing almost derisively, because it was like, it just read like bad writing occasionally. Basically I think it's interesting technology to experiment with. I think it is definitely useful in terms of like doing creative writing exercises. I approached this as essentially a creative writing exercise, and I did get something from it. It did help me propel me forward a bit in the narrative as well. And I think me and Simon will probably have a quick Q&A, and then we'll open it up to all you. And that's basically the presentation we've done. Yeah. I hope that wasn't too boring.
No, it was great. It's actually preempted like most of my questions. So. Yeah. I mean, what struck me when you were describing this is like, Chat GPT is sort of positioned as something that will help humans do things, but we've just sort of helped Chat GPT like explain itself as well in a way. So it was interesting. But to get onto the questions, it's very much positioned as an experiment. What you've done there's a literary approach and there's a scientific approach. I was just wondering, do you think the motivations of the scientists could be similar to the artist, or are they
very separate? I mean, it's a big question, because science and art traditionally have always they've often been very aligned. In a period like the Renaissance or something like that, there wasn't really seen as much of a separation. I think if there is any problem with the AI now, it's obviously it's huge companies that own it, right? And that is probably a bit of a problem, because its actual usage and spread is being controlled by, well, not to get too lefty here, but it's being controlled by capital, right? It's being controlled by the need to make a profit. So I don't know, I worry. I mean, often there's already been trends already for it to be less open source, less sort of open. OpenAI have been going that route a bit more, and Microsoft are obviously involved in all the big corporations and that. So I've gone off a bit of tandem there, but I think, artists have already had a very mixed response to it, which makes sense, because a lot of the, especially with image diffusion, which is where you basically create, new artistic images out of, from a text prompt. Like, we already know that a lot of the data was mined from illustrators, artists and stuff, so obviously it has a lot of them are happy, right? Which makes sense. Because if you're a 3D concept artist or something, or a 2D concept artist, it might be harder for you to get work now. So there has to be a middle ground, I guess. I'm trying to, with my book, this book I've written is part of my attempt to explore that in terms of writing. I'm trying to constantly adapt my own approach to it. I keep on going back and forth. I've got a lot of cognitive dissonance on it, to be in all honesty still. Even for the front cover, partially that's AI generated, partially I've done digital manipulation myself, partially it's a photograph. So I'm trying to combine all the media. I'm not that interested anymore in just literally just generating image diffusion images. I want to also edit it myself whenever I'm doing it personally as an artist, just because then I'm involved in it still. I'm still doing something.
Because that was one of the things I wanted to ask you about, was collaboration with other people brings its own sort of issues and problems and struggles. Imagine collaborating with artificial intelligence generates a whole new range of these things. I know there's a section of the book where you sort of delve into this a bit, but I was wondering if you could just expand on the actual the kind of creative tension.
So it can drive forward. In places it helped drive forward the narrative, but in other places it just frustrated me and actually blocked a bit. Because, like I was saying, often the chapters that were generated would repeat or get details very wrong, or they'd or it would just be like repeating itself too much. Like the words would, the words it would using would just be like too repetitive. It would be like with the megacorps thing. It's like that's really cliched. It's easy to come up with more creative. And, you know, that's quite a big part of the story as well. Of this whole, you know, the controlling power, if you will.
Did you edit that then? When you
No,
saw
I
that?
couldn't. That's the point.
Right,
After
okay.
it had done that in the first chapter, I had to work with it because I set myself very explicit conditions that I couldn't edit afterwards. So I had to write around it.
So how many times did you run the prompt in like next
Well,
chapters?
I can go into this actually. So for the first chapter 1, chapter 3, chapter 4 to about chapter 5, it was usually alright. Like what it was generating was good enough for me to work with for the next chapter. But when I started to get onto like chapter 6, 7, 8, 9, or whatever it is, it's like it got harder. It started repeating itself more. It started basically repeating the same story from this previous chapter.
Ran out of data.
It basically, well, it just like started like literally sometimes retelling the same story with slightly different words. So I had to like, I think I'm about chapter 6. I go into this in the book. It just started like almost becoming like, I guess this is a weird analogy for someone like who's got dementia or something like that. They start repeating themselves to get stuck in a loop, as it were.
I know that feeling well.
Yeah, so it's like it's like it. I mean, partially this may have been down to how I was doing it because I was feeding it the previous chapter and then a bit of instructions.
So how many times did you have to write a prompt for some of the chapters to rewrite the prompt
So
to
I had
make
a
it
lot of
regenerate?
I had a lot of trouble, I think, with chapters 8 and 9, which is the ending ones. I had to probably regen them 2 or 3 times to get
Is
a
that all?
comprehensible thing. Yeah, well, I mean, it is fairly efficient. Like if you say that this is rubbish, it's fairly efficient at like regenerating it essentially. And like I'd say in general, like this is it's proper good to do as a exploratory method. Like say if you want to write a creative writing story and you're a bit stuck for ideas, it's good in that respect. One area where I don't think it's so good potentially is, and this is probably already happening, it's just like people writing entire books with it and just saying I'm an author now or I'm a writer, because I think that it's not really. I mean, it like if you're just like it's like, you know, we've already got this in the art world as well, where people are just generating AI art and saying I am great, you know, I'm an artist now. It's like there is artistic things going on in that area, but if all you're doing is just running prompts and then just put it out there.
But that's been happening in art for ages. You've got sculptors who hire sculptors to do the
Well,
sculptures and say I'm the artist,
I'm not
and
like,
they haven't even touched
I'm
it.
not saying it's like, I'm not saying it's not art. I'm just saying that, because that's a long discussion to get into. But I just think if all you're doing is just running prompts, which is collating data off a bunch of people, then it's like there is a creativity in that. I do realise there is a curating aspect to it, and obviously I'd be a hypocrite if I say I don't agree with it because I'm already doing it myself a bit.
If it's good enough for Damien Hirst, it should be good enough.
Can I make an observation?
Yeah.
You know the first chapter you read out, I found cold.
Yeah.
The chapter you wrote, I'd say I felt warm.
Yeah. Well, the AI picked up on that as well because it had more. And I was quite conscious of that after AI had written the first chapter, because it is quite mechanical. It's very like, I mean, it's direct prose. It's like saying it's very matter of fact, and there wasn't as much dialogue, I don't think, in the AI written chapters. Whereas obviously I mean, it was good in a way because like I had that. It's good because in the first chapter I had a structure that I could work with, and then I could sort of, you know, write the dialogues, develop the characters. And I mean, the AI obviously picked up on that. There's more character development in the chapters I wrote. There are more human conversations, more dialogue in the pieces I wrote, you know, more exposition.
Yeah,
Like,
and Chris, I actually thought it was wonderful, that thing you were saying about cold and or whatever, technical. The writing is extremely, like you're saying, the sort of the diction was very, very technical and sort of, it was all very verbose and sort of stuff like that. And then when things became very loose and almost sort of colloquial and spoken word, you think, I thought to me, you have to remember, I'm very retro and sort of, even though I studied English and everything, I haven't got a clue about a lot of stuff to do with fiction and books like this. This is futuristic stuff out of this world, and like I say, it's not contemporaneous or whatever.
No.
So
one of the main things that was a real struggle, and this is always the problem with sci-fi often, is that, and I even go into it in the book a bit, is that it started just generating so much quantum mumbo jumbo. It's like everything's a quantum tunnel encryption, blah 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 blah. And then I had to deal with that as a writer, and like even as a human writer, it's easy to fall into that trap as a sci-fi writer of just like everything's explained by the word quantum, which is sort of a get-out clause in some respects. So I had to work with that. I mean, it was lucky that it was in a cyberpunk setting because you can just like it's a bit more of a in a lot of ways it's more of a dark fantasy setting in a lot of respects. I mean, it's taking science fiction and then on steroids, isn't it, really, with cyberpunk? So you can be a bit more creative with it, but something I did definitely struggle with was the fact that there was all this quantum mumbo jumbo it's generating in terms of like the concepts, and I'd have to roll with it to some degree.
Do you imagine that if you were to
That's sort of why I chose to do cyberpunk.
if you were to repeat this experiment in like a year's time,
Yeah.
do you think Chat GPT would be better at this?
Invariably, yeah. Invariably. I mean, there was some guy, because I was in Russia for a while, as a developer, and he was saying he's working on something to do with like trying to understand the context better and all that. So they're already doing that, yeah. And they'll be feeding it more data and yeah.
Can you imagine a point in time, like difficult to answer, I guess, but where AI becomes better at aspects of writing?
I don't think better. I mean, probably. Well, it'll be more efficient at proofing, right? Because every writer struggles with that. Everyone finds it a bore, but it has to be done. We all get punctuated. It doesn't even matter how technically great you are, writer. You're going to miss a comma somewhere. You're going to put, you're going to make some error. So it'll always be probably better than us at that. But then, I mean, we're the culture that's created. Milton, Blake, all these great figures of literary figures. Like, can AI do that? I'm not really so sure. We're the culture that's created the Bible, even if you wanted to go into all that, the Talmud or whatever. I don't think an AI can. I say this, I don't know, but I don't think it can create anything that's as rich as that and as elaborate as AI.
Just someone who's just been spending a lot of time generating AI images.
Yeah.
And on TikTok, that's just been my life during the flu. I'm just thinking about real life art, and some people might be very excited about the prospect of Liam Gallagher and John Squire getting together. And when you hear something like that in the context of loads of AI, you think, well, is this like AI? Is just that rainbow thing sounds very much like rain, and it sounds very much like it is almost AI in a way. It's got some skill in it, but if you typed into an AI thing, imagine Liam Gallagher and John Squire doing something a little bit like Rain from the Beatles, but make it rainbow.
Yeah.
And I suppose the question, if there's a question here, it's as an audience, if you're exposed to a lot of AI, and you see the prompt then, and if you're doing it yourself, I suppose for me it's like more interesting for me to mess about with AI and try and recreate something or develop something which is John Squire and Liam Gallagher, and write the lyrics for whatever it might be, than to hear them do it. It's just like the AI stuff is less tedious.
I think
It's a counter argument.
I mean, I guess like there is going to be a lot of interesting stuff that comes out of AI, undoubtedly. Like, I'm especially excited with how it'll be used by electronic musicians. Definitely, I think they'll have a lot of applications in that area, and it will be quite exciting. In terms of like traditional songwriters, like, I think maybe I'm just old-fashioned, but I think if you are a real like musician and you have the ability to generate novelty, right? Whereas if you, so say for example you wanted to make the Liam Gallagher and John Squire AI, all the AI's got to work on is everything they've ever produced, right? And so there is less chance for novelty there. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, I'm not. But all it's doing is based on everything they've done before. So it will probably just create a shallow clone of everything they've done, right? Instead of like them just getting in the studio, jamming, and potentially creating something new. Now, I do like John Squire. I'm not that much of a fan of Liam Gallagher, but whatever. It's like subjective in it at the end of the day. And
I think it was picked up a little bit by what you were saying about the first chapter being cold,
mechanical.
and then you fleshing it out because you have human experiences.
There'll be no emotion with AI.
Exactly.
will there?
There's no experience in AI. It's just whatever's been programmed.
Do you think? Sorry, just a general question, really. But do you think it's potentially the differences? It's like the act of writing or making music. That is the process. That's why people are doing it, because of the discovery that occurs during the process. It's not even necessarily the end result that's important, but how you get to that point. And AI sort of removes that mysterious human element.
Does it though? Because you have to ask a lot of questions. I started using AI because a friend of mine told me about it, and I found it useless, so I haven't touched it since. And it was very inaccurate, but I was asking very specific things that I'd researched for years, and it hadn't got a clue about it. But the point is, it's frustrating because you have to keep reprogramming it to try and get it to so it actually raises questions all the time, which is part of the creative process in itself. So it does. How did you feel about it?
I think, you bang on with it. Like sometimes, just basically regurgitating not verified information. So I think for like a creative writing project like this, like what does it matter? It doesn't matter if it's like a bit far-fetched. But if you were applying AI to journalism, that becomes much more of an issue, because you want journalists. I know they don't always do this, but you want them to be objective, right? You want them to be at least doing fact checking and getting. I know a lot of them don't. We have, but that's what it is. But ideally, journalists should be collating information that's fact checked and verified and yada yada yada.
It's sorry, go on.
So, is Chat GPT actually AI? Because I don't think it is. It's just a language model. It's not intelligent at
Depends
all.
how you define AI, right? So it's a language learning model, let's say.
But it's not intelligent.
No, it's not sentient in any way,
So
shape, or
it's
form.
not really AI. What's the real difference? And do you think we'll actually get to a point where we actually have AI and not just all these language models that people pretend are AI?
All the nerds in Silicon Valley seem to think it's a possibility now. Whether that's actually true is beyond my knowledge level, to be honest with AI. They do some podcasts and Silicon Valley types of me saying they've already got past the Turing test, but as to whether that's true or not, I'm not an AI scientist, I'm not sure. But
I was chatting to a chap in Allsage today. Believe it or not, there's a little chess club that meets in Allsage on Monday.
nice.
And we've got Chat GPT, but we've also, in the world of chess, if there's any Cheshire fan that, they'll know that Zero Alpha beats Stockfish.
Yeah.
And we've got AlphaGo, and then they've taken the Google model and it's gone in, they've applied it to protein folding in so that is a so if you are sad enough like me to watch any YouTube of the chess games, some of the moves that Zero Alpha does, that humans can't think of them.
Wasn't it Gary Kasparov, wasn't it?
Kasparov. Well, he lost to that was Big Deep Blue. And then they had stockfish, which is basically anyway, it seems to me like there's two types of AI going on here. One which is we're going to do protein folding, and it's going to be like a extension of computational biology, and
Which is good. I mean, that's amazing.
something and moves in chess, which humans, because they're bound by the orthodoxy of being a human playing chess, they didn't think that's just insane. It's
I think
stupid.
basically it's a catch-all term that they use to describe a variety of different things that aren't really the different AIs, you know. Aren't they?
Yeah, with that in mind, this is a general question. I was going to ask you this directly, but is there such a thing yet, or is there a requirement for an ethics of AI? Does there need to be some beginning discussions on what that looks like in creativity, in commerce, in whatever you like?
I think yes, definitely. I mean, partially also why I did this was to contribute to that discussion, I suppose. Yeah, I mean it does, undoubtedly, because it is going to roll out. It could increase automation, which will have huge effects on labour markets and everything else. So yeah, I mean, if the hype is real and it is really going to be as game changing as a lot of people suspect it will be, then how are we going to deal with a bunch of unemployed people who can't get any work, who are going to be replaced? I mean, it could be an opportunity, right? It could like create a more automated world. We've got more free time to do whatever we want. We get more artists, musicians, composers, whatever